Hello, everybody, and welcome to the May Cerini Connection. I'm Shari Diamond. I'm one of the partners at Cerini Associates, and one of the areas I really love talking about is IT cybersecurity controls. As part of our internal control assessments we perform, cybersecurity continues to be a hot topic, unfortunately. Something I've been doing for a number of decades already, and some things just really aren't changing as far as breaches, ransomware attacks. Every day you read something new. And now add artificial intelligence into the mix. Understanding the risks and being able to protect yourself are becoming more and more challenging, even for those that are very tech savvy. So the saying, you don't know what you don't know, comes to mind, and it's time to put your head out of the sand and figure out what you don't know. I'm very excited today to have with me today Brian Busto and Joe Horowitz of Stetson CyberGroup, and we'll discuss ways to create a successful cyber program. So thank you both and welcome.
Thank you for having us, Shari.
Thank you, Shari.
Excellent, excellent. So just a reminder to the audience out there, we are recording this, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm hoping you have some questions because we have an expert panel here. And, this is the time to ask those questions and get those answers that you're looking for. So let's start with, how do we create a successful cybersecurity program? What are the components? And maybe either one of you jump in and, decide to how we can do this.
Okay.
Brian?
I'll start off. So obviously, to build a successful program, there's a lot of components that need to go in it. So you're kind of looking at the hierarchy of all the little cybersecurity components that you're developing within your organization. So the first most important part is you have to know where you are today. So you have to understand what your current landscape is for the organization so that you can start building that program out. Now, that includes understanding the culture within the organization, because obviously you can't just blanket an organization with these different cyber controls, not knowing how they're going to be adapted within the organization. It's very important to align your cybersecurity goals to the organization's culture. You also want to understand what your risk appetite and tolerance are, which we're going to touch a little bit on the next question, or one of the questions that we wanted to discuss today. You want an incident response plan and your business continuity plans /DR, which are extremely important. They're on the priority side of policies that you need to develop and have fully executed within your organization. And that includes making sure that you have tabletop those exercises and that you have everybody that is involved with those particular policies needs to know what their role is in both of those plans. So that's really important. Getting to learn your threat landscape and all your assets. That's a huge part of having your cybersecurity program in place. And assets, I'm going to put a very large focus on, because if you don't know, you probably all heard the saying, if you don't know what you have, then how can you protect anything within your environment? I do see organizations that are spending more time, and their assets are becoming more known and understood within the organization, but there's a big break off when you're dealing with vendor systems and third-party systems that are in your environment, and they seem to be forgotten about, and they're not protected with the same infrastructure and same tools that you're using within the rest of your organization. So even though that's not your asset, that is an asset that you need to understand to reduce your threat, the threats within your environment, and to protect your landscape. Business impact analysis, which touches on both of those, really important part of your cybersecurity program. That business impact analysis is for you to understand and know exactly what devices or assets are on your network and the importance of those assets for both recovery methods, for incident response methods, and for valuation methods. So you need to those assets that are highly valued, you may want to put some more depth and defense protections to, or maybe you want to have some sort of a cybersecurity policy that has some effects to that particular asset. The risk management, which is again, the likelihood of some of those events that may or may not happen within the environment. Again, that fits under your cybersecurity program. And then just having a good understanding of risk within your organization.
Right, and that's, you put up so many great points there. And it's kind of convoluted because we talk about a you, like you need to do this, and then an organization has to do all those things, but it's not one person.
Right.
It's multiple people that need to be invested, as you said, so that it's a collective view. You talked about goals also. I thought that was really important because I think people have to understand there's company goals, there's corporate goals, there's organizational goals, whatever type of entity you're in, and why you're in business and what you're doing, what's your product, but at the end, you're using technology to get there. So you have to understand how to use it properly and how to put those other components in there to have a successful plan. And I think it's a little daunting, if you ask me, because there's just a lot of moving pieces to it. And I don't know that everybody's really set up to handle it. And Joe, I know that you and I go way back on our auditing, worlds. I guess, what are some of the things that you can, that you're telling people that you're seeing when you're going out there and working with, your clients?
Right. So to just add to a lot of things that Brian said, because everything he said is 100% on the mark. Number one, you really have to wake up one day and realize that my company is not too big or too small to be affected by anything cybersecurity related. It's not a one person. Hey, it's not the IT department who is responsible for protecting your data and information. It's really everybody. You can't just leave it up to the IT professional. Their job is to really make sure that your business is up and running on a day-to-day basis. They're not always going to be security professionals, nor do they know everything about every part of the business or what information that really needs to be protected or how to do an access control, who needs access. They're there to grant the access because you asked them to do it. They're not there to actually do these controls for you because they don't know everything about the business. I think there's a mind shift. There's a mindset that has to come along with cybersecurity that everybody is it's part of everybody's day-to-day now. It's unfortunate. Brian also touched upon these third-party vendors, which people always forget about. We see so many breaches and hacks that come in because the third-party vendor refuses to patch their software. They don't have security measures around their systems, or if they're even a third-party vendor, say like you're leasing your copiers and printers, you don't realize the data is on the memory of that, and then you send it out and someone's got the data on your copier printer. And that's just technology stuff. But then you have those vendors who come in and say work on your HVAC units. You don't know if they're background checked because you're just assuming that, hey, everybody's still working for the business. They're fine. We don't know. They come in, maybe they're plugging into your ports. They're stealing information from Sally in the front office who doesn't shut off her machine. I mean, these are kind of things you really have to think about. It's a whole program that everybody has to be invested in, not just say, oh, my IT person's got it, I don't have to worry about a thing, and oh, I'm bothered every month by phishing tests. And I can't stand that they do that. Stop it. They're there for a reason to really make sure that you're paying attention. The biggest risk out there is, besides the technology, are humans. Humans are really the biggest risk to any data and information in any business.
Yeah, I mean, that's still unfortunately true. And that's why the phishing exercises are really, really important. Training is really important. I mean, we all say this, we all know this, but again, I think it comes down to another thing that you talked about, your goals, and again, your risk tolerance. And I'm not sure that everybody understands what a risk tolerance is. Brian, maybe you want to expand on that?
Sure. So your risk tolerance is, it could go on a case-by-case basis, or it could be corporate-wide. And basically, that's the amount of tolerance that you're willing to change from the initial amount of risk that you're willing to accept. So let's take an example. All right, let's just say you're putting in some sort of an antivirus solution, and you've budgeted X amount of dollars for that solution. And your risk tolerance for the organization, let's just say is 10% or 5%. Your risk tolerance could be 10 or 5% difference from that amount of money that you've budgeted And that's where the tolerance comes. So tolerance is used in many different fashions, but tolerance is quantitative. So there's actually a percentage or some sort of a value to it, where your risk appetite is more qualitative. So it's more of a generic statement. So like, for example, when you look at I don't know, bit of reputation of your organization. So that risk appetite may be very low for that type of instance, where other ones you may have some more appetite for risk, but you can use this on a case-by-case basis, or you can use it in a global setting.
Right.
So how do you change that? Oh, sorry.
When
Go
Brian
ahead.
says, when we're talking about a low tolerance of risk for, like, say, your reputational for your business, that means that you have very low tolerance for any kind of bad reputation to your business if something were to happen.
So, I mean, if the culture is kind of lax, and maybe they don't have money, or, they just don't know, they don't have the people around, who's the person that you see more likely to provide that kind of education? I mean, obviously there's a quantitative, like if you can put a dollar sign associated with it, sometimes that speaks to the people that are in charge of the purse strings. Who do you normally see, can help advocate for that?
It's funny because it really has to come from the top. You really have to have the buy-in of senior management, your executives, the owner of the business. If they don't want to do it, then no one's really going to do it. It really just flows down. They sense the tone. They know the tone. But if the owner or the chief, the executives are saying, hey, listen, if something happens to our business, then there's no going back from this. And we can't recover data, and we can't do business with other companies anymore, and we can't do all this. How do we sustain ourselves if something is going to happen? And if nobody takes that stance that is from a higher level within the organization, whether it be board members or whoever the case might be, then the program's just going to fail, and ultimately something's going to happen. And you can't rely on a cyber insurance policy to be the all-knowing silver bullet that's going to save you, because it saves you from nothing. Right. It will save you some money. It'll give you some money back if you have to do some forensic work or whatever work at the end, but it does not protect you. It's a cyber insurance. It's just like if you get into a car accident, you still crashed your car, but you're getting money to fix whatever was done already. So the damage has been done.
It's interesting when you deal with this type of, when you start to look at this type of risk, because like I said, when you look at it on a case-by-case basis, I mean, look at every day in our personal lives, we deal with risk, right? If you're gonna cross the street and the sign says not to cross, the car is way down the road, you're gonna cross. Now, let's just say you have your child in your hand, or you're pushing a stroller. Is that same scenario going to occur? Maybe not, So, risk applies in so many different ways, and everybody handles that situation differently. I would say most people would accept not crossing the street at that point with the baby, but you're going to have some that do. So that level of risk can vary. And again, that goes down to your individual characteristics. So when you're looking at risk, a certain type of risk within your organization, and the remediation to fix that exceeds what your level of risk is there, then that might be an accepted risk. So it's very virtual, but you do have to have from the top down. You have to have that initial approach that, hey, we want to be secure. We want our risk to be as low as possible, and then you have to value out the rest of the components as they come along.
Yeah, and I think I'm doing this for a long time, so. It's not just being secure. I mean, yeah, but you have to know what am I protecting? That's one piece of the puzzle here, as far as those assets, and that we're going to talk about that in a second. But you're doing something. You're in business for a reason. Don't you want to stay in business? Is my thing. And are you aware of all the threats that are out there? And that kind of goes into culture. So I think it's people have to kind of integrate the whole business. It incorporates using technology. It just is. And that's a great point about cybersecurity insurance. When that's like a risk factor rating for us as auditors. Yes, you got cyber insurance, but if you aren't putting in all the proper protocols, if a breach incident happens, whatever, your cyber insurance will not pay through. They're going to claw back. I mean, and then what happens there? You could also be sued. I mean, so to us, it's kind of, why are you going to do that to yourself? But there's a cost associated with this. And we have some people on it, I know on this, that, we just don't have a lot of money to spend. And these costs are really, going up. So what are these assets that we're trying to protect? What's the framework that we should be putting in? How do we, go about trying to understand what the assets are that we're trying to protect? People think, oh, I don't have really anything confidential information. I don't do banking, whatever. No, that's not what's happening in the landscape right now with these threats. Either one of you want to take a shot?
So when you're talking about the information, you're right. Maybe they don't have credit card information or things of that nature, but they have customer information. They have employee information. So when you're bringing on an employee, a lot of places are getting social security numbers. They're getting copies of their driver's licenses. Maybe they're doing background checks and getting even more from the employees. And this is stuff that is remaining in your systems that you just don't think about, that, hey, maybe HR's got, I don't deal with it, so I don't know what's there. And then the customer information. I mean, the customer's giving you tax ID numbers. They're giving you all this other information about them. Maybe it's a customer that does business out of their home. So you have their address, their customer ID number. Maybe it's a social security number. So this is all information that you really have to consider that you're protecting, whether you think it's personal health information, maybe you don't have that, or things of that nature. There's still a lot of sensitive data that hackers definitely want, and because they can piece it together and really do a lot of damage with that.
It's also proprietary corporate information. I mean, you've developed all that you've developed in your business for so long. Hacking is not just bad actors. Hacking is other corporations trying to hack you to get your business values and to get your processes, your procedures, your business model. I mean, that stuff has a value to you. That's what you worked your whole life to create. And somebody else takes that, and that has just as much value. And just one last thing I want to add on the cybersecurity insurance. Often, we hear that, so often we hear, oh, well, I just transferred my risk to them. You're not transferring anything. If anything, you're just sharing some of that risk. And like Shari said, if they can get out of paying you on your policy, and you said, oh, well, I transferred my risk and blah, blah, blah. And 99% of you people have MFA, and that one person that didn't have it, that you said everybody in the organization has it, and they specifically spell it out that way. If that person gets compromised and their incident response team comes in to find that, then you're not going to get paid on that policy. And now you're in 10 times of a worse situation. So things to consider.
Right. And we're not saying it's bad to have cyber insurance. We're just saying that it's not the only thing you need to do. It needs to be part of an entire program, or at least, make efforts to do protective stuff rather than just worrying about it at the back end.
Right. So it's this whole framework approach that we keep talking about. Many of those other components that you already started mentioning at the beginning of the program, where we talk about all those pieces that need to be put in there. One of the things that, was big back, and I'm dating myself, even in the 80s, we talk about disaster recovery. Now it's moved to business continuity, because, you just can't audit around the system anymore. You can't really survive without a system. Even if you have something that's limited, like it doesn't really have that many users. Brian, that was a great point. It sounds like something out of a spy novel, like where you could have like corporate secrets being stolen, but you have a lot of threats out there that, you just don't know about, that might be interested in just taking you down, and just make your life miserable. And that's what some of these hackers are doing. They just pay us so that, we go away, kind of thing, and we don't make you, more annoyed. Some of the other things to consider too, I know it was one of the questions that we wanted to get to, is about regulatory compliance, because compliance is a big part of, especially, in our world in auditing, but, there are rules and regulations out there for a reason. Joe, maybe you want to start talking about the regulatory compliance, that the organizations might be subject to, companies.
Sure. So if you're a New York State business, let's start with that to begin with. If you are under financial law, banking law, or insurance law, there is the New York State Department of Finance has the 23 NYCRR 500, which is a list of about 14 or 15 different guidelines that you have to follow. to have a cyber program in place. And let me tell you something, they do come around and they do audit you, and they will sometimes leave you heavy fines. I've seen on their websites where they've taken some insurance licenses away from people. So they really don't mess around with that. They are coming out with another iteration of it this year, where now they have where there's exemptions, but I'm assuming that going forward, there'll be very much less exemptions for something like that. So it's something to be aware of. If you do have health insurance information, then there's HIPAA, which is regulatory. You have PCI for credit card industry. If you are a defense contractor now, coming down the pipeline in about a year or so, probably less, is CMMC from the Department of Defense. So the government is realizing that there's a lot of businesses out there that are doing business with government or other businesses or other agencies that are the problem areas, and they're just done really worrying about all the trickle down gaps and hacks that are happening from these third-party vendors, and they're putting regulations in place because, and not to make your life miserable, but because they have a vested stake in your business as well, or they share information, and they don't want their information to get hacked or leaked. So it's really important to know, if you don't know now, find out from either someone in compliance or legal, or if you want to reach out to us or even Shari or someone that you do work with, say, hey, this is what my business is. What do I fall under? Even recently, the IRS has stated that for one-person accounting shops and up, they must have an information security policy at a minimum to start with. So we've been starting to write information security policies for one person out of their home accounting CPAs, because it's required by the IRS now. It would be a shame for anybody to lose their license or business because the government says, hey, you're not following our regulations, we've audited you, and you're done until you can meet this.
Wow. So many things you just mentioned right now. So these audits that are going on, I'm just going to put it out to the audience out there. Has anybody undergone any of these types of audits? If you want, put your stuff in the chat, or if you had any question, put it in there. I'm just curious if anybody has gone through that. The other part of that is policies that you mentioned. And you know, who sets those policies? I mean, obviously, it's, you know, the organization should do it, and what kind of policy should be in place, and how do you coordinate that with your IT department?
So from a very start, each one of these regulations is requiring a cybersecurity / information security policy right off the bat. That really is going to give an outline of all the security measures you do have in place for your organization. Now, it's not just fully an IT controls guidance of the security policy you have in place. It's also asking, hey, are you reviewing your access controls, or who has access to sensitive data or customer data? It's asking, hey, if you have changes that need to be made to the system, does someone in the business know that changes are being made so it doesn't interrupt what they're doing, and approving that change? So there's a lot of things. It also in there, they'll talk about having to do security awareness and training. That's a must, because people just don't realize that they have to learn something new every year. And you know, these video trainings, I mean, they're good for what they do, but a lot of people, they click through it and they just go through the motions. They really don't learn anything from them at times. Live ones are great. If you can't do live ones, people just really need to pay attention to those video ones. So a lot of these things that you do as an organization should be worked on in this policy by everybody involved in executive management, senior management, middle management, to really put together, hey, watch the things we have in place. And then at the end of it, what happens is you realize the things that you're missing, that, hey, we're not doing this. Oh my God, we really have a threat and a gap here. I know I'm going to go back to the vendor management one for a while, because people forget that vendors have to follow certain guidelines as well under all of these regulations, and they have to have some kind of vendor policy. They have to have some kind of vendor checks and balances in place, and people just forget about the vendors. So it's really important to have these policies in place to continuously perform these controls and monitoring oversight of your systems and your vendors.
I think in addition to that, one of the most important things to me, having policies, is people in the organization then know what they're responsible for. First, you're creating a repeatable workspace for the policies that are in place. And you know, the staff does not have to assume that something is right or wrong. It's clearly defined. what they are to do and what they're not to do, and how they're supposed to classify data, how they should look at different things that make it really important and make your cybersecurity program become sustainable. That's important. You could build that program and 1 year later it falls apart and doesn't work. It has to be sustainable. It has to continue to be, it has to continue to grow. It has to continue to evolve. You need to do tabletop exercises. And I got to tell you, we've dealt with a lot of companies along the way, and some do it really well. They dedicate the time. You have to dedicate a resource to doing this to keep that ball rolling. And when these things come to fruition, it just starts to work like a well-oiled machine. And it's not a challenge anymore. It's an accomplishment, and it gives you opportunities to pursue new business that you maybe hadn't been able to, that other corporations are not in that position that you're in. So there's a lot of good benefits out of it. And when we look at the program, I ran through all those list of things. I know that was a lot, but that's not something you say, all right, we got to get this done this year. That's a 5, maybe even a 10-year roadmap, but you got to pick the ones that are most important based upon that, be it business impact analysis, and you want to build those pieces out first.
Right. And if you do a risk assessment, identify your highest risks first. You handle those first. You know, you take care of what's the highest risk to my business that something is going to happen that I need to address. Now, it could be a non-technology risk, that it could be just, hey, I need to tighten up my access. One thing I always like to bring up, or we like to bring up in our trainings when we do in person, is that we tell people, like, if you look at the definition of cybersecurity, the official definition, there's no place in that definition that says information technology or IT person in that definition. It's really just, the crux of it is just to protect your data and information. It doesn't specify who's supposed to do it, so it's supposed to be everybody who works on that.
But these are amazingly great points, because I think what people forget is, with a business impact analysis or a risk assessment that you might be doing, your risks can change. And just because you do it at that point in time, that's where your risks are at that point in time. And that's how you're making decisions at that point in time. But that doesn't mean you stop thinking. Right. You know, you have to continually, understand and keep assessing some of those external threats that are out there and getting that information. So subscribing to certain, news feeds, or understanding or making sure that you're staying trained and staying current of the threats that are out there. And working with your people in IT and making sure that they are also, whoever's kind of, heading up that cybersecurity part of it from a technical perspective is going to be staying on top of it. We talked about.
I'd like to add one thing about the business impact analysis, so just people understand how that differs from a risk assessment. Your business impact analysis is really going to identify if there was, say, either a breach or a disaster or something that happened. It's going to identify your most critical systems, operations, and people that you need immediately, from the top, from the highest to the least critical, so that if something does happen, you know exactly what you have to start with to get your operations up and running. The risk assessment is going to identify where your cyber and all your risks are to your organization, whether it be a fraud risk, a cyber risk, or environmental risk. So a little bit different, but the business impact analysis is very important for that disaster recovery, because if you have a disaster or something and you don't know where to start, then you're really not going to be up and running at any particularly good time.
Yeah, and we talked about restricting access, and we talked about classifying data. And we said, oh my God, if we start talking about that, it's going to go for hours. But I think we need to kind of maybe hit on that. What are we talking about when we say assets? What are we talking about data? How do you classify your data? Because it ties into the business impact. It ties into the risk assessment. How do you work with your clients and tell them, hey, this is, sensitive data, or this is how you can classify your data?
I mean, if you don't know what should be considered sensitive data or information, I would always say start with the regulations that you're required to abide to. HIPAA has a very well-defined. Look, most of the sensitive data is similar between each of them, but you can use those frameworks to pull out the data and the information that you need to. But then you also need to understand and figure out where that data is. And that's where it becomes extremely challenging for corporations. Because again, that goes back to what I said earlier. You need to know your assets. So you need to know your physical assets. Then you need to know also, you have files stored in cabinets and such. That's all part of this. Maybe not for, it's not on the internet, but it is a cyber threat. You also have data that flows from one program to another. You have people that are downloading, or staff that's downloading data from a system that has sensitive data. They're putting it in a CSV. It then sits in their My Documents folder and they send it off to New York State. People need to know what they need to do with that data, and that it is sensitive, and what to, either where to put it or how to classify it into a certain place. So it becomes a very complex situation, but you have to start somewhere. And even if you don't go back and start by finding all your old data, you want to at least start thinking about the new data, informing the staff that if you have this type of data that has these very well spelled out, this type of information, you want to put it in the folder, in your personal folder that says, sensitive data, and you are the owner of that. So when you look at confidentiality from CIA, from the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, confidentiality is not a corporate thing. Confidentiality is the asset owner who decides how that data should be classified. So if I'm downloading it, I'm the one that's deciding how that's classified, but I only could do that with the guidance of what the organization has told me and how they set forth that precedence on that type of data.
Right. So that also makes me think of something else about resources, because we need a lot of resources to stay on top of everything. And that's at a premium right now. Plus, it's just expensive, and some places just don't have the money to do that. So how do they balance that? What are some other options that they might be able to implement?
I mean, you can use some third-party sources. Look, if you can't hire anybody and you have to use your own staff, you just have to set aside some time every week and dedicate a little bit of time to that. And I think the most important thing that anybody can do is take small steps. You don't have to classify everything in one shot. Just say, if you just came out and said, if it has a social security number, you have to put it in this folder. You've already started to establish awareness, and that awareness, as you continue to develop it a little bit more, will become knowledge. And when people and staff have that type of knowledge, that's when your cybersecurity program starts to work. So you have to develop knowledge, but you have to start somewhere. And if it's small, but you've made those efforts to step forward and, at least define what you're looking to do.
And for those employees that handle that data, sometimes they need to step back and think, hey, if this was my information, would I want this getting out to somebody? Would I want someone stealing this? If the answer in your head is no, then you want to protect that information. Yes, I would think so.
You just brought up also another good point to me. You reminded me, data owner. I think that's a concept that not everybody totally understands. When they think of data owner, they just think of IT, but no, it's not necessarily an IT person that's owning that application data itself, that's really responsible for ensuring that the integrity of that data, the completeness and accuracy of that. When we work with, when we work with organizations, we want them to understand who those data owners are. And I kind of think of it sort of like a tree, like you have like the main people, and then you have branches out there. And then those are like the sub owners, or the sub managers of it. And then they can help dictate, what those access permissions should be throughout there. As far as a policy goes, like a data classification policy, can either of you maybe speak a little bit more about what should be, what should be contained inside a policy like that?
Well, inside the policy itself, you want to classify what would be public information, what is sensitive information, what's confidential information. So once you define that in the policy and you give those examples, say whether it be from a HIPAA perspective or whatever the case might be, whatever definitions you want to use, you could at least have something in writing that someone can reference back to and say, hey, I can see now that if I have this piece of information on its own, all right, maybe it's not so bad, but if I have this and this that I'm sending in an email that's not encrypted, then that's a problem. Human beings are very visual creatures. If you don't have it really placed down in front of them, you don't want them guessing. They don't want to guess what is and what, because then they'll always say, well, I didn't know this was right. I didn't know this was wrong. The policy is going to be very important to really give those type of examples and lay it out for everybody. Hey, this is the type of information you really need to start protecting. And if there's encryption in place, send it through encrypted email, send it, leave it in an encrypted folder and not on your desktop, because that's an easier place for someone to get in and steal that information. So these are the type of things you want to put in that policy on how they're handling the data.
That also should include as well, retention periods, how long that data should be held for, so other things like that are important to consider, when you're looking at data classification.
Yeah, and I think they are also, you have to define who those data owners are, who are going to be responsible for that data and for setting the permissions.
Yeah, 100%. So data should never be owned by IT, because data is basically what's happening in the business, right? So why would IT own data that, say, the business department or the finance department manages? So let's get that mindset out altogether. And that's what we've tried to do when we go anywhere we go. You have to identify if it's something in, say, the finance department, all right, maybe it's the CFO that owns the overall, all that financial data. And then underneath, for each section, the AP, everything AP related, owns by the AP manager, or however the structure is within the place. And then the employees under there are responsible to that manager to make sure that data is protected. Don't worry, don't feel like, oh, the IT person has it in a secure folder. You have to make sure you're putting in that secure folder, though. That's your just responsibility. They can only set up the technology around you, but they can't manage what you're doing once you have that data in your hands or on your desktop.
I always like to say IT is responsible to create the silo. They create the folder for you. You are the asset owner of, so everything should have an asset owner. Every software program, every piece of hardware, every device on the network should have an asset owner. Somebody has to be accountable and responsible for it. So my laptop, I'm the asset owner of my laptop. I'm also the data owner of any files that I create, and it's my responsibility to know what our policy is and how to handle that, whether I'm transferring it, whether I'm sharing it, whether I'm printing it, whatever it might be. So it's really important to have asset owners for everything. And again, as your program builds, those are the type of things you want to consider.
Yeah, and I'm like old school, so I'm before the internet, so on the mainframe world. And I thought that was really a good point that might have gotten lost about like paper files. Like if you were the head of HR and you had your files locked up in a cabinet, if you didn't want so-and-so to have access to it, well, then they shouldn't have access to it within the system. And also, that's right, people are downloading stuff, or they're, storing it in formats, either on paper formats, like banks do desk audits, like really looking at what do you have on your desk, is your desk opened, because all that dumpster diving, that's all coming back. The analog stuff is all coming back into play now, as far as those threats that are out there. So I think, if you don't want people to know about certain things, that's the owner and that's the person that takes responsibility. I think it's really important to define all that. We have about 5 minutes left, a little bit more, but one area that I do really want to touch upon is about cloud. And I know that's another segment, but I mean, a lot of people, like when we do these, questionnaires for our external audits, for our internal audits, we get a lot of responses back, well, it's in the cloud. And, it's all protected. I don't have to worry about it. And I can, get it, it's downloaded again and I can restore and whatever. So, those things don't matter anymore. Just curious on how you would respond to that.
Yeah. So I hear the same thing way too often. And again, it's just, it's so people are misinformed about the cloud. So there are multiple levels of cloud that you can use. You have your private cloud, your public cloud, your hybrid clouds, you have your software as a service, you have your infrastructure as a service. They're all different types. And you do transfer your risks and some of the management of that to your provider, but that is depending on the type of service you take. So a lot of cases, organizations are using a private cloud. That private cloud is completely your responsibility. So you're not offloading any of the risk to them. You may not be offloading the backup management of it or any of those type of things. So even like with Microsoft Office 365, the email platform, everybody's using it. You're offloading the infrastructure risk of that. You don't have an Exchange server in your office anymore. So a lot of that stuff is moved away. So yes, you've moved that risk away. They only back up your emails for 30 days. Most people don't know that.
Right.
They don't have litigation hold on by default. Most people don't know that. They don't set up any default policies, DLP, data loss prevention. None of those things are in place. That's your responsibility to then go in there, customize that environment to meet either your regulatory requirements, to your own corporate requirements, or to either just to protect your client's data, because everybody's got so much stuff in their emails nowadays. So they're not managing your retention period. So there's a lot of things to think about, and yes, you may be offloading some of that risk, but a lot of that is your responsibility still.
Right. And a lot of these third-party vendors that are actually managing your data and information that in the cloud, on a server somewhere else other than on premises where you are, they're responsible for having some kind of security controls in place to protect your information and data. And people just think, oh, it's done, it's not taken care of. That's not always the case. We see a lot of companies that refuse to have audits performed on them because they think it's just too costly or too bothersome for them. But the reputable companies will have what's called SOC 2 Type 2 reports, which, they're not super in depth, but what they do is they test the controls of the security controls around the servers and the systems in the cloud for you, or there on their side. And they'll give a report every year that you are, as a client, you have access to those reports to make sure that there are no problems with their systems and their controls. And it also gives you what's called user consideration controls, which means that there is still some onus on you to have some kind of control environment on your end in your business to make sure that there's the correct access to the information, that there's correct we call it policies in place and other things in place that still need to be done to make sure that it's a full umbrella of protections. These SOC 2 reports, even though they're voluminous, they're very easy to read if you really just know where to look. You're looking to make sure that there's no exceptions on the tests and that there's nothing major as far as any breaches happening. Because I've seen in the past where a big international company thought that everything was protected. I went and read the SOC 2 report. There was a minor breach that happened in one of the servers that they don't tell you about. So then they could actually go back and research and say, hey, what happened? Was our information attacked and taken? So these are kind of things you have to think about, that just because you put in the cloud, you're not guaranteed a secure environment.
Right. And also backup and restoring, as part of your backup recovery plan, incident response, whatever. We've seen where people were able to recover successfully and could sort of thumb their nose at some of these, ransomware attacks. We often get pushback on that too. I don't need to really do it. It's up on the cloud. I can get it anytime. Again, I don't think that's necessarily 100% accurate. I think you should still be testing these things periodically.
Yeah, we usually tell clients at least quarterly, just to make sure you can spin up your information and you can spin it up timely. I mean, if they're telling you that you can get it back within 24 hours, test to make sure you can get back in 24 hours. If you're a type of business that you are like, you have to go, and you can't get your information back in 24 hours, say it takes a week, what are you doing for a week? You're losing so much revenue by not testing to make sure that this is happening. Yeah,
that's, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I know it was quite a long time ago, and I don't remember the exact date, but I know there was, maybe it was 10 years ago, Amazon who hosts an awful lot of people, they had some sort of an incident and lost, it was like, maybe it was 2% of their clients' data. I don't even know what the number was, but it was a situation that occurred and people actually lost all their data. So, I mean, yes, you're offloading that risk to them, but, again, you got to think that if something, we're all connected on the cloud, there's always a hacker out there that's better than the people that are developing the software. And now you add AI into it. You can go onto ChatGPT now and ask it to write a script that could exploit a software, and it'll write something that will give you enough for, to kind of work through and make something happen. So they're using these tools for not so good as well. And, it's a continual challenge that we always have to stay ahead of.
Right. But
Absolutely.
that doesn't mean they shouldn't do stuff. Anybody in this call should not do anything if they're like, oh my God, they can get in anyways. It just means really you should have layers of defense to make it harder for them to get in, and then be able to detect it before they get to your core information. That's really the main thing here. And that's why it's important to stay on top of it, and that don't let your house burn down to just, hope to rebuild it, because the hope is, it's not going to help you.
Right. No, it isn't. It's a bit of a scary time, especially with AI, a little disturbing for me, especially. But I do think, you just have to stay aware, and be protective, and, put the components in place so that, at least you are trying, to make sure. One of the main questions I would ask, and we're like just about out of time, but, I would always tell how long can you be out? How you're so dependent on these systems, how long can you be out? You tell me, and then we can figure out how to kind of, move forward and what kind of plan you need to have in place. So, Brian, Joe, it's been fabulous. We've already hit 45 minutes flies with us. I want to thank you both. I want to find out how can the audience or people contact you if they have any questions or information they want to get. What's the best way they can reach you?
Sure. So you can reach us. Our main phone number is 631-417-3500. We're located on Long Island, so we're not coming from upstate. We're coming, but we do travel where we need to go. Our email addresses, we can send that out as well. As for anybody who wants it, we'll give that to you, Shari. You can pass it along to anybody, and any of the contact information that they need. We're always available to answer questions, and we're really just here to help, because we know what it's like to, we're small businesses ourselves, and we know what it's like to, for a lot of these small to mid-sized businesses to deal with their regular day-to-day operations, and now have to deal with cybersecurity in the mix and someone trying to steal your stuff.
Yep. So thank you both very much for being here. Audience, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to help you. Thank you all for tuning in today. Feel free to reach out. As I said, check our website for prior connections that were uploaded, as well as other great info that we have on our website. And we'll see you next month. Thank you again. Be safe, everybody.
Thanks for having us, Shari.